House will come to order. This morning, the pledge will be said by Shady Anderson from Arupe Jesuit High School in Denver, Colorado.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a second. Mr. Randall, please call the roll. Come this way and shake your hand.
Representatives Arndt. Baisley excused. Beckman. Representative Beckman.
Excused.
Benavides. Benavides.
She's here, but she's not here.
Excused.
Byrd. Bockenfeld. Buck. Buckner. Quintale. Caravale. Carver. Catlin. Coleman. Representative Beckman is present. Cutter. Duran. Escar. Exum. Froelich. Galindo. Garnett. Geithner. Gonzalez Gutierrez. Gray. Hanson. Herod. Putin. Putin.
Excused.
Humphrey. Jackson. Marquez Lewis. Representative Hooten is present. Kennedy.
Typically,
Kip.
I've been doing fines. I won't do it today.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kip. Oh, there she is. Yep. Kraft Tharp. Landgraf. Representative Benavides is present. Larson. Lewis. Liston. Lontine. McCluskey. McKean. McLaughlin. Melton. Michelson Janae. Molika. Saw him too. Molika.
We'll do thirds and then some seconds, but it should not.
Neville. Pelton. Ransom. Rich. Roberts. Sane. Sandridge. Singer. Sirota. Snyder. Soper. Sullivan. Tipper. Titone. Valdez A. Valdez D. Van Winkle. Weissman. Williams. Wilson. Madam Speaker.
Here. With 60 present, 4 excused, and 1 vacant, we have a quorum. Representative Galindo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the reading of the Journal of Friday, February 22nd, 2019 be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Wow, good job, Representative Galindo. The motion passes. Announcements and introductions. Any announcements and introductions? I have one. House Bill 1065, which is the Public Hospital Board of Trustees, we are removing Representative Rankin, who is now Senator Rankin, as the House sponsor. Senator Rankin will be the Senate sponsor. The House sponsor will now be Representative Soper. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good Monday morning, colleagues. We've got some special guests in the chamber today. The Colorado Nurses Association is here with us, and I have a couple of members of the Colorado Nurses Association over here on my right. I know I can't introduce Tracy Hill and Susan Smith, but they are members of the Colorado Nurses Association. Welcome to the chamber. Please stand.
Well done, Representative Wilson. Representative Mullica and Escar.
Whoa, Representative Wilson. You kind of took the thunder a little bit. I'm a nurse, members, and I was also coming up to welcome the Colorado Nurses Association. We have quite a few members over here on the left, and they're coming down to kind of see what we do down here and have their voices be heard. And so if we could all welcome the nurses over here on the left.
Representative Esgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First and foremost, my wife is also a registered nurse going back for her MP right now, so I just want to say I appreciate all the work you do, really, truly, from the bottom of my heart. Also, I have two more announcements, Madam Speaker, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. You all may have seen on your desk an invitation for the legislative breakfast for Colorado Wins. This is your state employee union. They will be here tomorrow morning downstairs in room 107. Of course, you have to eat breakfast before you go into room 107 because we don't eat food in there. But I just wanted to make sure 8 a.m. they will be here. Make sure that you have a chance to go. And also, I just wanted to say that it is Independent Bakers Day today at the Capitol. My family has a past history and currently actually part of the independent bankers. So independent bankers are near and dear to my heart. So make sure when you see the independent bankers who are here today to say hello and welcome them. You may have one in your area. Thank you all.
Okay. Representative Duran.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I need the Capitol Choir down. We had a birthday this weekend. Can you come on down? Come on, don't be shy.
You a singer for the Capitol Choir?
No.
Good job. Good job. Well done. Well done.
All right, come on.
I didn't say that right?
You got it, nailed it.
That's good.
Where's the birthday girl?
Okay, now everybody knows me.
All right. Ready?
She's coming.
Okie dokie.
All right. Ready?
Who is it?
Jackson. Yeah,
Rep Jackson.
Rep Jackson, there you are. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Difflin Jackson. Happy birthday to you. Woo!
Happy birthday, Representative. Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I would like to call your attention to a group of future leaders who are here somewhere with us today. We have the 4th grade class from Cotton Creek Elementary, deep in the heart of Westminster, coming to visit us today. I hope you will look out for them and take a moment to say hello, introduce yourselves, and let them know all about our wonderful state and our government. Thanks.
Representative Singer. Ann McLaughlin.
Want to kick it off, and I'll give the time and date.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We'd like to make a point
about acupuncturists. So next Monday, if you have any questions that you'd like to needle your acupuncturist about, at 8 a.m., they will be providing free breakfast down in the House committee rooms for anyone who has any questions, concerns. Hopefully you'll get a chance to meet with some of your constituents who are providing a vital healthcare role in our communities.
And we will continue to needle you until you show up.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was so bad. Representative Liston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, as a Rotarian, us Rotarians, if you'll listen, everybody, I've been neglecting that we have not had our Wednesday morning Rotary meetings for a couple of weeks. I'll take the fall, I'll take the hit, but this Wednesday, right after announcements, fellow Rotarians, we're going to have our brief Rotary meeting at the well. This is a reminder, Wednesday. So, Representative Hooton?
Representative Hooton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to encourage everyone who has been or intends to be a Rotarian to join us at the well Wednesday morning before announcements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Gray. Representative Gray, are you making an announcement?
Members, yesterday the state of Colorado lost just one of the great heroes that I've ever met in this state. A woman named Carrie Ann Lucas, who many of you have seen before and have been down to the Capitol, passed away yesterday. She was 47 years old. And she is one of the most fearless advocates that I've ever seen in my life. She had a severe muscular neural disease. It's a form of muscular dystrophy, I believe, but was in a wheelchair, had breathed through a ventilator, and was just as fierce and strong a person as I have ever met. I got to know her first about a decade ago. I was planning a relatively large event in Broomfield, and she came to me and she said, well, we should talk about your plans for folks with disabilities. And I said, yeah, I feel pretty good about where we are. And then she brought out her list of about 23 things that needed to be fixed in order to give folks with disabilities the ability to participate in the things we were doing the same way as everybody else. And her life story is just amazing. She went to college, she went to seminary, she got her Master's of Divinity, and then she began working with the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition and found her real calling there as an advocate for folks with disabilities. So much so that she then went to law school and became an attorney to fight for people with disabilities in society, especially, and one of her great passions was parents with disabilities. And she not only fought for the rights of parents with disabilities, but she lived her life that way as well, adopting 4 children, each of whom had disabilities, who I've never had the pleasure to meet. And again, this happened yesterday, so they're not here today or anything like that. But her children and her family will greatly miss her, and the state will greatly miss just somebody who made a profound impact on everyone she met, but also the policies of this state, legally, politically, and otherwise, and she will be greatly, greatly missed. Madam Speaker, I'd ask for a moment of silence.
A moment of silence is granted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I knew that Carrie Ann was in declining health, but had not heard that she had passed. I had the honor of working with Carrie Ann on our concerns about physician-assisted suicide, where she participated in community events and discussing that, but was adamant in being so ferocious in saying, my life has value. And she believes strongly in the sanctity of human life. My life has value. You see somebody in a wheelchair with intense disabilities, but my life has value. And I will fight to prolong my life and to prolong the life of others. And so, Carrie Ann, We had been talking last year about doing some other forums. We knew we would have to make special arrangements to Skype you in once again. And she said, well, Terry, I may not make it. And I said, well, Carrie Ann, I know your spirit is strong. So, Carrie Ann, rest in peace.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't know Carrie Ann, but it sounded like a wonderful lady. Now we're going to brighten things up a little bit. 2 weeks ago, I was blessed with a grandson you all know, but there he is, Boston Park, 2 weeks old.
So beautiful. Thank you, Representative Pelton. Any other announcements and introductions? The next order of business is third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1031.
House Bill 1031 by Representative Gray, Senator Gonzalez, concerning allowing each parental guardianship as a minor medical marijuana patient's primary caregiver in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1031 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1031 on third reading and final passage. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 63 aye votes, 1 excused, and 1 vacant, House Bill 1031 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1038.
House Bill 1038 by Representatives Duran and Lontino, Senator Janal and Story, concerning dental services for pregnant women covered under the Children's Basic Health Plan in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1038 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1038 on third reading and final passage. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please vote. Representatives McKean and please close the machine. With 62 aye votes, 1 no vote, 1 excused, and 1 vacant, House Bill 1038 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1080. Oh, Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm moved to lay over House Bill 1080 so that we can find a Senate sponsor till tomorrow, Tuesday, February 26th.
Seeing no objection, House Bill 1080 will be laid over as requested by the Majority Leader. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1173.
House Bill 1173 by Representatives Garnett and Neville, all Senators Fenberg and Holberg, concerning the authority of an ex officio member of the Legislative Council to appoint a temporary replacement for that ex officio member at a meeting of the Legislative Council.
Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1173 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of 1173 on third reading and final passage. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 62 aye votes, 1 no vote, 1 excused, and 1 vacant, House Bill 1173 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1052. Oh, Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to lay over House Bill 1052 one day till Tuesday, February 26th to find a Senate sponsor.
Seeing no objection, House Bill 1052 will be laid over one day. Which brings us to General Order, second reading of bills. Representative Exum. You have heard the motion. Seeing no objection, Representative Exum will take the chair.
The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for the reading of bill at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested as they are printed in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and not read unless requested. Bills will be laid over upon the motion of the majority leader, and the court rule is relaxed. Okay, Mr. Randall. I'm sorry. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1037 one day.
Thank you. Seeing no objection, House Bill 1037 will be laid over by requested by the Assistant Majority Leader, Representative Kennedy. Mr. Randall, please read the title to House Bill 1172.
House Bill 1172, Representative Reisman, also Senators Gardner and Cook, concerning an organizational recodification of Title 12 of the Colorado Revised Statutes in connection there with limiting substantive changes to those that conform similar provisions to achieve uniformity, eliminate redundancy, or allow for the consolidation of common provisions, or that eliminate provisions that are archaic or obsolete.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. Representative Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry about that, Mr. Randall. I move 1172. There is no committee report.
To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, 1172, I have a visual aid here, is the Title 12 recodification bill. Brief history for new members. This process began with the passage of a bill to authorize the project by our nonpartisan Committee on Legal Services staff. In 2016, for the last 2 years, we have all passed a number of bills to relocate parts of what used to be the old Title 12 to where they make more sense in our statute books, culminating last year with the creation of Title 44, which is basically everything that the Department of Revenue does, alcohol, tobacco, gaming, vehicles, things like that. And what this bill is doing is reorganizing what is left of Title 12 so that it simply makes more sense for everybody who has to use the law, members of regulated professions, folks in our Division of Professions and Occupations who have to enforce the law, and so forth. So this is essentially a good government bill. It was unanimous out of committee, and I'm going to ask for your support, but not before, Mr. Chair, I move L001.
Amendment L001 has been properly moved and is now displayed. To the amendment, Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, such as the dedication to getting this right, that you'll notice it's actually been laying over for a little bit. That's because Committee on Legal Services staff, LLS staff, have been talking with folks in the Division of Professions and Occupations who oversee a lot of these professions that we're talking about, and even some folks from the Attorney General's office, just to basically catch some errors. This amendment is the result of those discussions. Nothing is intended to be substantive here. It really can't be substantive because that would be beyond the scope of the project that the 2016 legislation authorized. So this is in furtherance of cleaning up the law, and I ask for your support for 001.
Thank you, Representative Wiseman. Any further discussion on Amendment L001? Representative Soper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this is a great bill. As you can see, it's incredibly long. It's over 2,000 pages long. And I know we didn't have it in our bill folder, so I think it's appropriate to ask that the bill be read at length so we understand it. I move to withdraw my motion.
Well done. Thank you, Representative Soper. Is there any further discussion on Amendment L001 to House Bill 1172? Representative Herod, are you coming to comment? No?
Oh, not an amendment.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment L001? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L001 to House Bill 1172. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Thank you. Amendment L001 is adopted. Back to the bill, Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further technical amendments. Again, I urge passage of 1172 so that we can make the law more accessible to those for whom it is relevant. I ask for your support.
Thank you, Representative Wiseman. Representative Herod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I just think it is so fitting that we have one of our members who likes to have, I think, some of the most robust conversations at the well, carrying the largest bill in Colorado's history. He has promised not to read it at length. But I do know that he would like to talk about it individually with each and every one of you. Should you have any questions or want to go through any sections, with that I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative Herod. Any further discussion on House Bill 1172? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1172. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. House Bill 1172 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title to House Bill 1130.
House Bill 1130 by Representatives Liston and Houdenough, Senators Cook and Fields, considering requirement that a person have certification of the Colorado Peace Officer Standards Training Board in order to be eligible to serve as the elected sheriff of a county of the state.
Majority Leader, Representative Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1130 one day to Tuesday, February 26th.
Seeing no objection, House Bill 1130 will be laid over one day to Tuesday, February 26th. Thank you, Majority Leader Garnett. Mr. Randall, please read the title to House Bill 1170.
House Bill 1170 by Representatives Jackson and Weissman, also known as Williams and Bridges, concerning increasing tenant protections relating to the residential warrant of habitability.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1170 in the Health and Human Services Committee report.
To the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the committee, we had a few amendments. One added some notice. If a landlord gives some temporary relocation, the tenant must still pay their rent. Allows for the landlord to get some estimates, and it does have a provision that we had in there before, but just simply strengthens the provision if the tenant actually acts in bad faith. We had another amendment for the Bar Association in regards to appliances, that if the problems reoccurs, the tenant can't just go ahead and break their lease. And another one for realtors, that a landlord and a tenant may agree in writing that the tenant can perform those specific repairs. It's just sort of a parity issue for smaller single-family landlords.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, all of the amendments that my colleague just described that are part of the committee report reflect conversations we had with stakeholders on this bill subsequent to introduction. A lot of that came from discussions with the real estate section of the Bar Association as well as the realtors. The realtors are neutral with that amendment that's part of the committee report. In the vein of further clarification with stakeholders subsequent to committee, I move 005, which is an amendment to the committee report.
Amendment L005 has been properly moved and now displayed. To the amendment, Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this amendment does one thing. It basically cleans up some language in a new definition we're introducing to the statute for electronic notice. We had some language that maybe was sort of inartful in the context of electronic notification there concerning certificates of service. So at the suggestion of real estate attorneys with the Bar Association, we are bringing this amendment. We ask for your support to this amendment to the committee report.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L005? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L005. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Amendment L005 is adopted. And I think we're back to the committee report. Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, members, the committee report incorporates amendments that we arrived at after significant discussion with folks with an interest in the bill, chiefly attorney representatives of the real estate section of the Bar Association. We consider this a pretty integral part of the legislation at this point. It reflects our good faith negotiations with stakeholders. We ask for your support on the committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Public Health, Care, and Human Service Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Public Health and Human Service Committee report to House Bill 1170. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say no. The committee report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guys, I believe that having a safe and affordable place to live is the cornerstone to becoming self-sufficient. Without it, it's kind of tough to, get a job, study for school, or manage the stress in your life. This bill simply updates the warranty of habitability statutes, which, by the way, have never been updated in the decade since the statutes were put into place, and now it's time to add more balance to the scales of justice. I want to tell you all something. Nobody, absolutely nobody, is trying to harm landlords with this bill. No one is saying that a landlord can't make a profit off of their property. But as we know, people are charging what the market will bear, and when people are paying those market rents, guess what? They deserve to live in safe and habitable conditions and have equitable remedies for housing violations. I will say that I appreciate the many landlords who came to testify, who were also very appreciative of how fair we were in trying to work on this particular piece of legislation. So now I'm going to tell you very briefly what 1170 actually does. It says that tenants have the right to live in a dwelling without mold or other dampness conditions, that they have heat, running water, and functioning appliances. If there are health and safety violations, a tenant has to go through some very, very, very specific steps to notify their landlord, and then the landlord has time to respond. The tenant can get estimates on the cost to repair from a credible professional. Note that the landlord can also choose to hire their own professional and make those repairs. If the landlord does not make that home habitable, then and only then can the tenant withhold rent, and only in the amount of the estimates, and then have the problem fixed by an unrelated licensed professional. Again, the tenant must have followed all of the rules regarding notification of the condition and before withholding any rent, and they must, again, provide 10 days written notice to the landlord. This bill does also say that a landlord shall not retaliate against a tenant and specifies penalties if a landlord does so. Need to point something out. There are also provisions to protect the landlord, once again, if the tenant acts in bad faith, and that includes possession of the property and double damages. Members, this is a very fair and very necessary bill. I would ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, that Friday a couple weeks ago when we were all here till 6:30 or so, some of us were not done. My co-sponsor and I went down and talked with the good members of the Public Health Committee for about 2.5 hours about this bill. Going until about 9 o'clock that night, we heard from a variety of folks on both sides of the issue. We have continued conversations with them and others to try to bring further clarity to the bill since our presentation in committee. And in the vein of further clarification, Mr. Chair, I move 004, which is to the bill.
Amendment L004 to House Bill 1170 has been moved and properly displayed. Representative Weissman to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment basically does two things. Some of what we are doing in the bill is adding provisions that major appliances, if part of the lease, have to be appropriately taken care of. So what we're doing here is adding a definition that was suggested to us by the real estate section of the Bar Association, and that we thought made sense. That's the first part of the bill. The language at the bottom is conforming language, tracking the definition that we're inserting earlier in the bill. We're also doing one other thing in the definition of electronic notice. We are removing text messaging. That is a modern and ubiquitous means of electronic communication, but the point was suggested that perhaps it ought not be included given the details that need to be present in this kind of notice. We all know a text message can get lost, so we were happy to take that out at the urging of folks, including the Apartment Association and some conversations with, again, the real estate section of the Bar. So we ask for your support on 004.
Any further discussion on Amendment L004? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L004 to House Bill 1170. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Amendment L004 is adopted. Back to the bill, Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, in the vein of clarification and stakeholder work, I move 007.
Amendment L007 to House Bill 1170 has been properly moved and now displayed. To the amendment, Representative Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment does a few things. At the top, we are removing language from the introduced bill that would have conferred jurisdiction to small claims court, which is a division of county court, to hear motions for injunctive relief. Interestingly, some folks on both sides of the bill thought that maybe we should not let small claims court do that. We heard that from some folks who are on the landlord side. We also heard it from some attorneys who represent tenants, the idea being that we do not want folks to make those motions lightly, and often folks in small claims court are pro se. So we are agreeing to remove small claims court jurisdiction for injunctive relief, leaving it only with district court and county court. That's the first part of the amendment. The second two chunks of text there from line 5 down are again coming out of conversations with the Bar Association concerning the right way to deal with appliances. In the bill, I want to call attention to line 18. We've had a lot of conversation about appliances. You know, what if Kenmore breaks and a Maytag goes back in? That's fine. An appliance is basically an appliance. So we are actually allowing there to be a presumption in favor of non-retaliation so long as the appliance is reasonably comparable. We appreciate the engagement of stakeholders in getting us to the point of these amendments, and we ask for your support on 007.
Thank you, Representative Wiseman. Any further discussion on amendment? Yes, Representative Beckman to Amendment L007.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the sponsors on this amendment, I'm a little concerned because it's my understanding that rent has stopped being paid. And so I thought the reason for putting it in small claims court is so the owner of the property would actually have the ability to move rather quickly to dispute the claims. My concern with going to district court is that it is going to add a great deal of time to this process. And it could be actually an entire complex that is not paying their rent. And the only, and this is, they're not paying rent because they claim it's materially interferes with life, health, safety, and of the tenant without even a third-party inspection by someone in local government. So that's my concern, that it's just going to be an unnecessary burden for people who actually have rental properties, where people that they're renting to are not paying rent, and that it would take too long of time having it go to district court. So I'll just...
Representative Wiseman for a follow-up.
Thank you. Concerning the amendments, Mr. Chair and members, the ability to go to district court for a breach of the warranty of habitability is in our law now. It's been there since the statute came on the books in 2008. The only question in the amendment is whether the possibility of injunctive remedy should be extended beyond district court also to small claims court, which is where the lowest monetary value claims are heard. It is true that it's very much the exception rather than the rule for injunctive relief to be available through small claims court specifically. So the point was made to us, you know, maybe we don't want to go there for these types of remedies. We're willing to make that change and that concession. So that's what the first part of this amendment does. I'm happy to talk about the other aspects when we're back to the bill and off the amendment, but that is what this amendment does.
Thank you, Representative White. Representative Beckman on the amendment L007.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would once again ask to not support this amendment. It is in current law, but this language in the bill changes current law significantly because there isn't an outside inspector. So it is somewhat of a judgment call of the people that are living in the rental apartments. So I thought it was the sponsors of the bill's intent to try to really help out the property owner by having it be able to go to court a little bit faster. This is going to be very burdensome when you take it in its entirety with this entire bill, and I would ask you to vote no on it.
Thank you. Representative Wiseman.
Members, again, district court is the court of general jurisdiction in our state for this and anything else. We do intend for these remedies to be available a little bit more quickly. That is why jurisdiction is extended to county court, which is different than small claims court. In the bill, that is not changed by this amendment. What this amendment is doing, the top part of it anyway, is removing injunctive relief from the jurisdiction of small claims court. That represents no change in existing law. Small claims court has no jurisdiction now to hear these kind of motions for injunctive relief. Adding that jurisdiction was in the introduced bill. This amendment proposes to take that away at the request in part of the apartment association from folks we heard from prior to committee. Again, we are to the amendment, members, and not to the bill. I ask for your support on the amendment, and we'll get back to talking about the bill in just a minute.
Any further discussion on Amendment L007? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L007. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. Thank you. Amendment L007 is adopted. And we're back to the bill. Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very concerned about this bill. It increases tenant protections to the residential warranty of habitability, but I think for many, the concern is that it will cause rent strikes. Similar legislation has passed in more liberal states, New York and California, and they have had an increase in rent strikes. So I'd like to walk you through the bill and the most impactful areas of this bill, because it's important for people who have property to understand what this bill is going to do to your private property rights. Let's start with the fact that Colorado already has significant consumer protection laws regulating rental agreements, pages of them. But what this bill does is it changes the definition from what conditions make a rental uninhabitable from that is dangerous to the life, health, and safety of a tenant to what materially interferes with life, health, safety of the tenant. So what does that mean? It's so very subjective. And it also makes it easier for people to stop paying rent without a third-party review. What happens in local government, what is happening in current law, is that the current requirement is the tenant notifies the inspection, code enforcement, or the building inspection department of a local county or a city, and the local planning department comes out and they make sure of all the things they're required to do: running water, not backup of sewer, waterproofing, weather protection, fire code, building code, and public health code. They already do this. What this bill does is it leaves it up to the tenant to decide if something is materially, and I don't know what that is, interferes with life, health, or safety, and once that decision is made, they can stop paying the rent. This bill also adds mold as a condition that could deem the unit uninhabitable. I can guarantee you, right now, this building has mold. I can guarantee you every building, every rental in the state of Colorado has mold. I tried to look up to see through the Department of Public Health what levels of mold would be impactful to health, and there are none. So there's usually more mold outside than inside, and humans are exposed all the time to mold. So to tell a renter or an apartment owner that all of your apartments have to be mold-free or we're not going to pay rent is pretty significant, and that's what this bill does. It reduces the time for conditions to be addressed and adds appliances from, I think, 72 hours. I just recently, well, it was before Thanksgiving, my microwave broke. I had a repairman come out and put a new part in it, which they ordered the part. That didn't work. I ordered a microwave. That didn't fit. It took me about 3 weeks to get a microwave. This timeline is really short. I received an email that from a landlord that said when people want to skip out on the rent or give a landlord 24 hours to fix something, we are not plumbers. To mandate something like this and to have it played out in court, and now it's not even going to small claims court. Now they're going to have to go to district court, is unreasonable. So it does allow for an email to be sent, and maybe that's good to move into the modern day. But they're making judgments. The tenant, the person that is renting this dwelling, is making the decision if it's habitable or not, and then they're making the decision if they're going to stop paying rent or not. So when rent is withheld by an individual tenant or a few tenants, it's called a rent strike. And these are becoming very popular in the United States again. They're very popular in Venezuela. Actually, about 75% of the rental units in Venezuela have squatters in them. They no longer are paying rent. The landlord can look to go to court now, but the numbers involved as more and more people stop paying rent, the remedies for the landlord really decrease. And with the way this bill is set up, it's going to be months and months until the landlord can get to court. This will be comparable to the construction defect laws that we faced. It's going to add a lot of legal fees to someone who owns property, and it will decrease the supply in an already difficult market. I know that sometimes violating private property rights can sound like a good idea under the umbrella of consumer protection, but the broader implications of denying and limiting these private property rights of a landlord to manage his property are going to be disastrous, and they have been in other areas. So I'd like to ask for a no vote. This bill is very impactful on private property rights. It goes too far, and we already have so many protections involved. I get that there are some slumlords. I get that. That's a handful of them. We have hundreds of thousands of very good, responsible property owners in the state of Colorado. Why are we doing this to them? I ask for a no vote.
Any further discussion? Representative Singh.
Let me drop this mic. Hold on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this bill does much of the same thing that we heard on the bill earlier, and that if there are some things in this bill that may make landlords nervous, rents will rise. Let me address probably the number one portion of the bill that's going to make people the most anxious and actually make people stop renting homes altogether. And I'm talking about, of course, your smaller landlords that have a single property, have a small duplex or quadplex, which is probably a good chunk of your rental properties, especially in your rural areas. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move L008 and ask it be properly displayed.
Amendment L008 to House Bill 1170 has been properly moved and is displayed. Representative Singh to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hoping this is going to be a friendly amendment for a couple different reasons. One is I understand what the sponsors are trying to do. Nobody should have to live in a home that is uninhabitable. Nobody should live in a home where they're paying for your basics, your range, your refrigerator, those kind of things. But to the point that Representative Beckman was making, there is no current standard. And so if we have this provision in the bill to ensure that the problem of mold has to be verified by a public department, health and environment, or a local home and building inspector, that would go a long way to protecting everybody.
Representative Weissman to Amendment L008.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do need to ask for a no vote on this amendment because notwithstanding some of the prior conversation, here's what the bill says right now. There is mold associated with dampness, which condition, if not remedied, would materially interfere with the health or safety of the tenant. That's what we're talking about, not any mold, not mold on your fridge, not mold on your bread, mold that would materially interfere with the health or safety of the tenant. That is what we're trying to prevent. That is an appropriate protection, and I ask for a no vote on the amendment, please.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope that the sponsor isn't trying to make light of a very serious problem, because if this bill goes through the way it is without any standards to protect both the tenant and the landlord, I don't think anything's going to get rented in Weld County for sure. I don't know if you are aware of the problem that we have. And one of the problems we have is the state engineer won't put valid restrictions on augmentation ponds. We have a gentleman that was up from 5 sump pumps to 7, and now I think he's up to 11 sump pumps because otherwise water would pour into his basement. We got a lot of homes like that with sump pumps, and guess what they have? Mold. Now they can sell those homes, but I don't think you can rent those homes under this bill. So we need to establish some kind of standard that is agreeable to make sure it does not materially interfere with the health and safety of the tenant. I, too, am primarily concerned with the health and safety of the people who actually live in those homes. But imagine, your bill also says going to court if the tenant decides to withhold the rent. So let's make sure before that happens, we have some kind of mediator that has some kind of function who deals with mold on a daily basis, like a home inspector, or some other authority like the Department of Public Health and Environment, that can actually say, yes, this will interfere, no, this won't interfere. This is very important, and I can't stress it strongly enough that if it's something like this is not in your bill, rents are going to rise because people are going to stop renting their homes. That's just what's going to happen. So I'd urge a yes vote on this particular amendment.
Thank you. Representative Jackson to Amendment L008.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, once again, I would remind you, I would ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L008? Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment one of the concerns I have is that there are no standards for mold. And so if we don't have a third-party inspection from local government code enforcement or building inspector, which we currently have now, I don't know who would make the decision that it materially interferes with safety of a tenant. My concern is that you could have mold, well, you will have mold, well, there is mold in all rentals in the entire state of Colorado. We know that. We live with it. It's in the air. It's outside. So if you had an apartment complex where half of the renters are not paying rent because mold is impacting them, and you have no third-party inspector, and you have no standard, and there's no way to even deal with this besides going to court, that's a rent strike. And it's happening in California, and it's happening in New York. If that's what we want to set up, we should be honest about it, because this kind of legislation allows for that. And then the landlord gets put in a situation where it's very unfair. It's very unfair for the private property owner. If you can't choose who if people aren't going to pay you for renting your property, it becomes a financial burden, and in something very vague that you really can't pin down. So I'm very concerned that mold, which is not in the standard anywhere, and nationally, except for these areas that are having rent strikes, it's not in the code. And it concerns me. This would help the bill tremendously. I think it's something the sponsors could do to help the vagueness of the bill, so that there would be still some remnants of private property rights of people who own property and rent property.
Thank you, Representative Beckman. Any further discussion on Amendment L008? Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to make sure we are not talking about mold on bread or mold in refrigerators. We are talking about mold that is materially hazardous to a tenant. And again, almost every home in this building has mold in it. They're old buildings. There's old buildings all over the state of Colorado that are perfectly safe, but are going to have elevated levels of mold versus a new property. Some are going to have elevated levels of mold because they sit next to a river, but they are not unsafe. What this is saying to landlords across the state is, if a tenant feels that they see any kind of mold or think that there's some kind of mold test they performed, there's some kits that you can buy, not always super accurate, right? Say, look here, I got a mold test. They can just stop paying, and that puts both the tenant and the landlord in jeopardy. There needs to be some kind of standard. People are used to using home inspectors. Let's at least agree to that they can use a home inspector regardless of who pays for it at this point in time to make sure that the home is safe. And most people want that peace of mind. You know, I don't know if you're like me, but I sometimes freak out if I think something's mold or not, and I bring out the Clorox. But, you know, we want that peace of mind for the tenant as well. But the unintended consequences of this bill will be, and I'm just telling you right now, is landlords are going to start pulling their properties off the rental market. And that's going to be harder and harder for people to find homes, especially those that we want to protect the most, who live at the poverty level. Because guess which homes are going to be pulled first? Everybody know? It's going to be your older homes. It's going to be the older homes. They don't rent for as much. They're going to tend to have more mold. So I'd ask for a yes vote on this very, very, very reasonable amendment.
Representative Humphrey to Amendment L008.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to rise in support of this amendment. Thank you to Representative Sane for running L008, I think we're talking about. I think this is important. There's already a limited availability in many areas of rentals, and let's just get another set of eyes on this and have that inspection. Make sure that we're doing the right thing before we eliminate that sort of availability. I think, as Rep. Sane just said, this is a reasonable amendment. I wish that we could come to an agreement on it, and I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Humphrey. Any further discussion on Amendment L008? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L008. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. Amendment L008 is lost. Back to the bill, House Bill 1170. Any further discussion? Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was a no vote in committee. I feel this bill is all about the tenants and not about the landlords. But every time we increase regulation, that increase costs, which in turn increase rents. They will not absorb it. They will pass it on. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to affect the people that really, really need a home. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Representative Larson was next. And we are to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was also one of the members that heard this bill in committee. We heard a lot of compelling testimony about things that had happened to individual tenants, bad situations with leaky roofs, with vermin, a lot of other situations. But something that gets overlooked is that those are already covered under existing law. This bill, like I said, adds vague and broad sweeping instances where a tenant can withhold rent. And this will have the exact opposite consequence of increasing rental prices throughout the Denver metro area and throughout the state. I am a millennial. I'm 32 years old, as many of us in this body are. All of us have friends who are struggling with making rent payments, with the unaffordability of attaining a home, of attaining rent. This is going to harm the people it is purported to help. We had testimony to that exact effect, that this will cause a direct increase in the amount of rent because landlords will go and either sell their units, or those that hold on to their units will seek insurance products that will shield them from the vast open liabilities that this bill will create. That will be an increased cost, and that will be rolled into their rent. If you care about people being able to live affordably in this state, you will vote against this bill because there are adequate protections under the current law, and this is going to harm young people. It is going to harm people in low-income situations. And it would be a shame for us to just pass this on a party line vote. I strongly urge opposition to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Representative Sandridge from El Paso County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to agree with a lot of the recent statements that have been said about the concerns associated with this bill. But let's discuss some real world concerns. I worked in the financial industry for 10 years. I'm already talking to some of the financial advisors that are using this, us going after this industry. Some of the financial advisors that deal with equities and bonds are often telling their clients, let's get out of real estate, let's get into something a little bit more stable. Let's get out of Colorado real estate. This is already being used. You look at real estate mutual funds, real estate ETFs, they're pushing away from Colorado due to the high regulation. Just like anything, any other investment, you're there to make money. And if it's becoming more difficult in Colorado, they'll just go to Missouri. So when you see a huge apartment building, that's often not a mom and pop investing millions and millions of dollars. That could be a fund that's investing their clients' money to pay for that. They'll just go someplace else. Nobody's forced to own real estate. It's an investment. And if it doesn't look good anymore, they'll just sell it and go to a different state. Another thing is I'm actually texting with somebody in my district. Right now, every time I see something associated with real estate, I send them the information. They're getting to the point they've had enough. Real estate's at a high right now. It's a good time to maybe sell it. If they sell their properties, their 5 houses, who do you think they're going to sell it to? They're going to sell it to other homeowners that don't want to rent it out because the investment isn't sound anymore. They're going to sell it to families who need a house, and now an owner is gonna have that house, not an investor to rent it out. It means there's less properties on the market. So these are real world examples. When you have ETFs, mutual funds, that are looking at our estate and deciding to go someplace else, that's a huge deal. When you see these mom and pops saying, I don't know if this investment's going to be right anymore. I can pull my money out, real estate's at a high, pull it out, go invest into stocks, go invest into bonds that's a little bit more secure associated with regulation. You really need to be concerned. We all want to help. We all want to help people find quality homes. But gosh, we can do things that make the situation a lot worse. So with that said, just really be cautious of this bill, and I stand in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sandridge. Any further discussion? Representative Beckman to House Bill 1170.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is important to understand that we already have very strict laws that and guidance for residential premises that people are renting to be deemed uninhabitable if it substantially lacks waterproofing or weather protection of roof and exterior walls, plumbing or gas facilities, running water, and reasonable amounts of hot water at all times, functioning heat facilities that conform to applicable law, electrical lighting, common areas that are clean and kept sanitary, extermination in response to infestation of rodents or rats or vermin, an adequate number of appropriate exterior trash cans, floors, stairways and railings maintained in good repairs, locks on all exterior doors. These are things that if there's a problem, that your local code enforcement officer would come out and look at if they were going to deem the property uninhabitable. To add mold to this list it makes the bill so subjective, and to allow for the tenant to make that decision is setting up rent strikes in the state of Colorado. And I don't think we want to go there, considering the environment. Already we don't have enough rental apartments, and this will only drive cost up. I would ask for a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Beckman. Any further discussion on House Bill 1170? Representative Singer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to get real with you guys for a second here. So a lot of people have been talking about me today. They may not know it, though, because I'm a renter. I don't have a property. I rent. And so when people come to the well and they say that this is something that's bad for me and that they're trying to take care of me, if this bill passes, this isn't going to work for me, I'm going to take a little bit of notice about that. So I'm going to tell you a really quick story and then tell you why I support this bill. I almost lost my election this year, and not because I didn't get enough votes. It's because I couldn't find a place to live in my district. I've been renting from the same place for 14 years, got bought out by an investor, and the investor decided, you know what, we can make some more money, so we're going to raise the rates. Well, the rent doubled and my paycheck didn't, and I didn't know where I was going to take my family. And then you start asking questions about whether it is that you even belong in the community that you represent. These are hard questions. And I will tell you, when I lived in that apartment and I have a great relationship with those landlords, when something went wrong, the first question in my mind was, well, if I bring this up, are they going to raise the rent? If I bring this problem up, are they just going to find a way not to lease to me next year? So talking about rent strikes, I paid my rent on time because I needed a place to live. I wasn't going to withhold my rent because I didn't know where I was going to go next. And forget about trying to afford a lawyer. We are paycheck to paycheck. And in terms of investment companies running out of this state and selling their homes to homeowners, we don't have just a rental problem in this state. We have a home ownership problem in this state. When people in my district have to pay $500,000 for a 3-bedroom home, people just outside my district on average have to pay $1 million for a home. We don't have just a rental problem in this state. We have a home ownership problem in this state. It's happening in my district, and I know it's happening across the state. This bill is the last line of defense for people who feel like they have no other place to turn. That's what this bill does. This bill is some modicum of understanding that people who are trying to make ends meet need just a little bit of a safety net, just a little bit of reassurance that if there's something that's affecting their health and their safety, that they know that they can go somewhere, they can make those claims and not have retribution against them. We have a problem already today. It's a rental problem and it's a home ownership problem. And if investors want to leave this state and let homeowners buy homes again, I think that's great. I think that's great because I can't wait to find a place that I can afford. With that, I encourage an aye vote on House Bill 1170. Let's protect our renters. Let's create a relationship between renters and landlords where people can feel like they can have these conversations without being afraid to go to the people that want to do the right thing and provide safe housing for our constituents.
Thank you, Representative Singer. Any further discussion? Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And when I started in this body, I too rented, but this is not about me, it's about the people I represent. When we look at the National Home Association and how certain cities fare as far as being unaffordable, Denver, Fort Collins, Boulder, and Greeley are one of the top ones. And I'm going to say this is going to not only make it worse. One of the reasons we have unattainable housing in this state is because of Democratic policies, just like this one.
Representative Singh, a state to the bill, not impugn anybody's motives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. I brought up a problem that's going to not only make people pull rentals off the market, but those same homes are probably going to sell for a lot more than certain people can afford. It certainly is not going to solve the problem. The reason people rent homes, for the most part, are oftentimes because they're starting out as a first young couple or a single person, and sometimes they don't want to buy a home. Sometimes buying a home doesn't make any sense because you have to mow the lawn, you've got to pay the taxes, you got to do all those extra little things that come with home ownership. And then there's some people that really need to rent a good, affordable home. If we put in things that don't have standards like mold is everywhere, there's a good possibility that not only tenants and landlords are going to run into trouble. We want to make sure homes are safe and affordable for people. And all we asked for was a standard to make sure we can do just that. Therefore, I ask for a no vote on this bill.
Thank you, Representative Singh. Minority Leader, Representative Nettle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I think this was actually, the problem was just actually laid out very clearly. If you have a person who's just entering the market to rent out one of their homes that they actually own, so the small guy, the little guy, right? Maybe it's my wife and I, maybe it's someone who's moving from a condo to a house and they want to rent out their other property. Laws like this will make it so complex and so difficult for them to do that because they can't afford the compliance. Those people will have to be will be forced to sell to larger investor groups. Because those are going to be the only people that can comply with this. And I agree, we do have a home ownership problem. We have an affordability problem in Colorado. As we see with home ownership, the prices of homes in Colorado have skyrocketed because of construction litigation issues. And this bill does to rental properties what construction litigation laws had done to home ownership prices in Colorado, and it's only going to increase the cost of living in Colorado. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Minority Leader Neville. Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it seems like, in a way, we're just defying economics and just math reality. Real estate is a commodity. I know some people don't want to look at it like that, but in reality, it's a commodity. The more or less of a commodity you have fluctuates the price. If you make it more difficult to make the commodity, we'll have less of the commodity. Less of the commodity, prices go up. The commodity right now is being produced by mom and pops and really by REITs. I don't know if people know about REITs, real estate investment trusts, okay? Their sole purpose is to make money, okay? So whenever you see one of those huge apartment complexes, they do focus on lower income housing. That's a big thing, a lot of money. Usually a REIT is funding that. And a REIT is just a group, it's just like a mutual fund where people like us can invest in it. Hopefully the fund will go up in price. We can make money. But if we make it more difficult for this state to have real estate and not make money, the REITs won't come here. They'll go to Montana, North Dakota. They're going to go wherever it is to make money. Okay, that's just a sad reality of life, of the investment dollar. And let's not forget the reality of life. Investors want to make money. Okay? That's the reality. Investors want to make money. And if they're not making money, well, they'll put their money someplace else. So we could say we all want to help the less fortunate, the poor. But if we beat up the person who makes the commodity, we're going to have less of it. That's just a sad reality. Just a sad reality. So really think about the economics of math, how the investor works, and let's do something to actually protect our less fortunate. Let's do something to maybe make it easier to make this commodity. The more of this commodity we make, the prices will go down. It helps our less fortunate. So with that said, hopefully we will oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sandra. Any further discussion on House Bill 1170? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption. Representative Pelton to House Bill 1170.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of immigrant workers come in my district. We need to think about them renting these homes and stuff. It's going to raise the cost for those workers and going to make it very hard for them to stay. So let's think about that when we're considering this bill. So I'd urge a no vote.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion on House Bill 1170, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1170. All those in favor say aye. Aye! All opposed say no. No! House Bill 1170 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title. I'm sorry, Assistant Majority Leader, Representative Kennedy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I was jumping in too early.
Okay. Mr. Randall, please read the title to House Bill 1119.
House Bill 1119 by Representative Coleman, also Senator Foote, concerning public disclosure of a completed peace officer internal investigation file.
Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1119 in the Judiciary Committee report.
To the Judiciary Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report approved the strike below amendment that does not remove anything from the original bill draft. It adds an appeal process if a person is denied access to any information in a completed internal affairs investigation file. This amendment also adds additional items and more specificity to what can be redacted from the internal investigation file. Additional items that were redacted are any compelled statements made by peace officers, any video interviews, if an official transcript of the interview is produced, unless after receiving the transcript, the request to video, and any video or photograph that raises substantial privacy concerns and the identity of officers who volunteered information. Finally, this amendment adds a new provision to allow someone to waive confidentiality if they choose, creates an appeal process if someone is denied access to any information by a custodian, and adds a provision to ensure that when a court rules information is confidential, it will also be redacted. Finally, it makes access to these internal investigation files effective only after the effective date of this law. I ask for an aye vote on the committee report.
Any further discussion on the Judiciary Committee report? You have an amendment?
It's not on the committee report.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L007 to the House Judiciary Committee report.
Amendment L007 has been properly moved and is now displayed. To the amendment, Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, what this amendment does is makes clear what's already in case law, but it explicitly says in this statute, should it pass, that any compelled statement during one of these internal affairs investigations cannot be used against an officer in a criminal prosecution. The reason for this is, of course, we want our officers to be honest when they're going through these internal affairs investigations, and that they will not be liable for what they say during those investigations. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. Representative Coleman to Amendment L007.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a friendly amendment. Members, I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Amendment L007 to the Judiciary report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L007. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Amendment L007 is adopted. Back to the Judiciary report. Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for an aye vote on the Judiciary report.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the Judiciary report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Judiciary report to House Bill 1119. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The Judiciary report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Coleman.
Thank you again. Members, this bill makes an internal investigation file of a peace officer for any uniform or on-duty conduct that specifically involves a member of the public subject to an open records request. The bill, however, requires private information such as Social Security, bank account numbers be redacted before complying with an open record request. Any identifying information on confidential informants, youths, and victims must also be redacted. And additionally, a file is not open for inspection if there's an ongoing criminal investigation case related to the matter in this file. I've personally sat down and had conversations with police, advocates, chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys, representatives, the CML, and many other stakeholders. We've been able to get the DAs, Municipal League, and also the chiefs of police to a position of neutral. And I hope you will see this bill strikes a balanced compromise by protecting the sanctity of internal investigations while defending every Coloradan's right to public information about their public servants. Again, this bill removes the ability to deny requests for a specific type of incident. However, this bill expands the ability and instruction of redactions to protect officers, investigations, and public safety. I ask for an aye vote on 1119.
Any further discussion on House Bill 1119? Representative Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in strong opposition to 1119. Colleagues, the county sheriffs are opposed to this bill. The Fraternal Order of Police are opposed to this bill. Let me tell you why. Under current law, the process for seeking internal affairs case files allows for a third party who requests the case file that includes all the witness statements, including statements by fellow police officers, could be individuals that were witness to the incident that is in controversy, might be somebody who observed something from their front window of their house and have given a statement. Internal affairs investigations, historically, the witnesses have been promised confidentiality. That's what an internal affairs investigation is. It is a process to seek the truth when an allegation of misconduct is made against a police officer, that they acted improperly. And the whole point of an internal affairs investigation is to get to the bottom of it. That's why you may have wondered about this amendment. In an internal affairs investigation, police officers are not allowed to take the fifth. They are required to respond to questions, whether it implicates them in violation of the law or not. They are compelled to answer questions about their fellow police officer. They are compelled to answer questions about their own conduct. That is what an internal affairs investigation is. So what happens when you take that process with that purpose and that function, and you now, even with some of the redactions that are allowed in 1119, respectfully, the vast majority of witness statements, even if you redact the name and the address, just the nature of the witness statement itself is going to identify who is giving the statement. If it was the person in the neighborhood who saw the altercation and they said, well, the incident happened at thus and so address and I was looking out my front window and this is what I saw. So their name is redacted. You can still figure out who gave the statement. I was with the officer that the misconduct allegation has been asserted against. I was in his car, or I was called to the scene, and this is what I saw. They're going to be able to identify who made that statement. This also includes videotaped statements. Imagine releasing videotape statements of police officers. How long do you think that's going to take before it gets on social media? Now, there are some provisions in 1119 that restrict some video statements and in some instances would allow for a blurring of the face. But quite frankly, I have been involved in these investigations, at least in a military police context. And I firmly believe that what this bill would require, this takes away the discretion of the police department in what is released, which is what Denver has right now. Denver has a policy on what they release. This would put it into law and take away any of that discretion. Extraordinarily dangerous and damaging to the internal affairs investigation process, undercutting the basic function of an IA investigation. If you do not think that it will affect the willingness of police officers and others to come forward and be fully candid if they know their statement is going to be released to the public, it will. And so, respectfully, I rise in opposition to 1119, and let me just say, members, how do we handle this right now? Let's say that I have reported an act of what I believe to be misconduct by a police officer in the state of Colorado. And the Internal Affairs has done an investigation. And let's say they have sustained that allegation. I want to see their analysis. And so I request a copy of this case file from the police department. They deny it. What is my recourse under current Colorado law? I can go to court and I can say, Your Honor, I believe the public interest in releasing this case file, or at least these portions of the case file, outweigh the other considerations. The considerations that the individual police officers have when they participated in that internal investigation. It might be some privacy issues that the police officer has, because these IA investigations can range over not just the conduct, but a lot of other areas. So the process right now in Colorado is there is a way for the member of the public or a nonprofit like the ACLU or others who want to get the Internal Affairs case file to go to court, assert the public interest, and the court then weighs those factors. And in Colorado, we have had many instances where the court has agreed that the public interest outweighs those other interests. But there have been some cases where they have denied it and said no. Especially, let's say the investigation did not sustain a finding of misconduct. It found it frivolous, that it was unfounded. So, quite frankly, I think the current process we have does work. I think what is being proposed in 1119 would do harm to the Internal Affairs process, investigation process, which is so critical. It is essential, members, when you are talking about an organization as important as a police department, that you have the ability to drill down and to find out exactly what happened and force those individuals to tell you what happened, whether it was embarrassing or poor judgment or reveals other aspects that are uncomfortable, but to get to the bottom of it, because only in that way can you determine the proper action against disciplinary action for police officers, but more importantly, or as important, does it show a systemic problem within the police department? Does it show that a change in policy or process is needed within the police department? And only when you have a process that prioritizes reaching the full truth, all the facts, can you get the kind of lessons learned that then can improve policy and process within our police department. So for all those reasons, colleagues, I ask for a no vote on 1119.
Thank you, Representative Carter. Representative Benavides. I have several people in the queue, and we're going to go in order of how we have folks. So go ahead, Representative Benavides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we heard this bill last year, and we heard it again this year. And this bill basically takes Denver's current practice and puts it in a bill to apply across the state. And with all due respect to my colleagues, this is not just about the privacy of an officer and their witness statements. There was a case, which is the standard, the Harris case. And in that case, it said the balancing test should be public interest versus private interest. What this bill did It took that case and the whole progeny of cases to get there, and it identified all of the specific areas that triggered an officer's privacy. Each of those areas are in this bill and are being redacted. So there is no more of the issue of any privacy interest. That was taken care of in this bill. And just so you know, this bill also took pains to say none of this will be released until after all criminal cases related to this, after all appeals have been taken place. So this is way after the fact. It is not initially. And members, I'm going to tell you, I served on a commission, and we spent 10 to 12 hours a week reviewing complaints against police officers. I did that for almost 10 years. And in that, I saw many complaints. And most of the complaints were between an officer and an individual, nobody else. So when you have two people, most of these complaints, and we heard testimony that it's roughly 9 out of 10 are not sustained because there isn't a preponderance of the evidence, because it's just two people. And so the problem is, for individuals, yes, right now in most jurisdictions in this state, there is a process. They can request the records. If they're denied, they can go to court. We had somebody from the Press Association testify that it costs $20,000 to $30,000 to take these cases to court. Most people don't have that. Even they said they don't have it. They have to pick and choose which cases they go forward with. So that's a problem when we have already done everything that we can to these case files to safeguard the privacy interests not only of police officers but other witnesses, of the individuals involved. We've done everything in this bill to do that. My colleague brought up video statements and other videos related to this case. You know, video is interesting, and many of you have seen the videos that are on social media or on TV that are out there, and it's all because of our telephones. But the reality is local jurisdictions are making up their own determinations of how to handle video recordings. We do not have a state law that says they have to be released in so many days or so many months. In Chicago, there was a case of Laquan McDonald, who was shot in the back running away from police officers in October of 2014. That video wasn't released until 3 years after the fact, after the officer had been fired, after statements by police officers had been dealt with as far as discipline. Police departments are very knowledgeable about this, and they know what to do in these cases. And again, when we say the current practice, where they go to court in most jurisdictions, the current and best practice is in Denver. And it's been going on for quite a while, where they give a summary. If you request the file, they give a summary, because sometimes those files are fairly lengthy. And then if you want more, then you ask for the file, and then you're given the file. So that process exists in Denver, but it also exists in 14 other states. So we are not leading this change. This is an important change that does what we're supposed to be doing. It balances the public interest in these investigations against the private interest. And it does it very, very carefully. There is nothing else that should be redacted from these reports that isn't. And again, it waits till after the fact, after everything, all the cases, all the appeals have all happened, before anyone can go forward. So I think this is a good bill, and I commend the sponsor for really working on this, working with all of the groups that he mentioned earlier to get to the point to make this a good bill for everybody. So I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Carver. taken the place of Representative McKean. I'll put you in the queue. Thank you. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And colleagues, another very important aspect of this is the Supreme Court Garrity case. Because the internal affairs investigation process compels testimony, including by the officer that the allegation has been made against, the Supreme Court said that at the point of the internal affairs investigation where it appears that there may be a violation of law by the police officer, that the police officer still has the Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate themselves. And so at that point, there is an issue with continuing to, what most police departments will do is they will suspend the internal affairs investigation, at least as questioning the officer, and they will start up a normal criminal investigation that complies with Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment in investigating whether the officer committed a violation of the law. But again, the internal affairs investigation usually is going to suspend because core to the IA investigation is compelled testimony. You will answer the question. So Garrity is a key piece of this, and it is why we have structured the internal affairs investigation under current Colorado law the way we have. And there's much reference made that Denver does this now. Well, you know, what Denver does is they do a summary, which I think is a good idea, a summary of the internal affairs investigation to give that information to the public, and these summaries are actually pretty detailed. The number of witnesses that were discussed, what was looked at, and what the determination was. So I think that's actually a good practice. But then Denver, if the underlying internal affairs file is requested, because Denver is doing this as a matter of policy, they still retain the ultimate authority in how much they redact and what they release, right? When you're doing it under your own policy. If we put this into statute, it no longer is a matter of policy. It is no longer exercising that judgment in each individual case, with ultimately the member of the public able to go to court to seek the entire case file and make that balancing. If 1119 passes, you take away any discretion of the police department in what information is redacted. It will be only what is listed in 1119, regardless of that particular case and regardless of the jeopardy that it puts witnesses and police officers in. And if we pass this bill, there is no balancing. Right now, to get an internal affairs case file released, you go to court, and the judge looks at the public interests and the other contrary interests and does that balancing. This bill eliminates that process. This bill mandates you will release the internal affairs file with only these things redacted, regardless of what the harm is. There is no more balancing, colleagues. No more balancing at all. And now those witness statements and videos and how fast they will get on social media to be tried in the court of public opinion, without the context, without the other facts, without weighing the consequences to the police officers and the witnesses involved in the incident? This is unwise. This has harmful consequences. The goal of the bill is well intended. The consequences in some of these cases will end up being very damaging. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Gonzalez-Gutierrez. No? Okay, Representative McKean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You know, we're having an interesting debate today, and part of that debate is a little bit of an interesting procedural glitch, because we have some substantive amendments for this bill, but because the amendment of the adoption of the committee report was a strike below amendment, these become all settled questions. So it's interesting. I think it necessitates a discussion of these amendments now, because truly, as our Right Honorable Representative Benavidez said, we are trying to safeguard the public's interest in this information, the privacy, balance against the privacy interests of having these investigations be a tool for law enforcement. So I think the best way to sort of delve into where these amendments come from, and in many ways what we had as a discussion in committee, is to talk a little bit about this Denver model. The city of Denver gets inundated with requests for internal affairs investigations, files. They want its citizens and attorneys and all kinds of people would like to have the information about what was investigated, what happened. And I think it's important to remember that in internal affairs investigations, we are talking often about the action of an officer, an action during a portion of a larger investigation. And so as we start to look at those things and we want to know what's going on, often internal affairs investigations go far beyond that. And they go back into the other investigations that officer has been a part of. They get big. And so the challenge is, where do you draw that line? And where do you draw the line between simply allegations that are investigated and allegations that are sustained? So the amendments that truly would like to discuss with you guys goes around that whole idea. What is the Denver model? The Denver model is that their records.
Representative McKean, we are to the bill. We've already passed the committee report, so we're to the bill.
We have, sir, and Mr. Chair, I would ask for some latitude on describing this process to our colleagues so they understand what it is.
Okay.
So they have a records officer who accepts that request for information for this file. They give a summary. And when the summary is delivered, if there's a need for more information, then they ask for the entire investigative file. One of the challenges in this bill is that it does not draw a distinction between allegations that are sustained or merely alleged. That is not just problematic, but it strikes at the core of what we have as a system of jurisprudence, where we do these investigations, where we take a look at what's going on, and if there is not a sustained violation, then those investigations can be closed, the summary can be offered, but what amendment we would like to have here is that distinction of being able to provide that depth of information on allegations that are not sustained, which I think goes to the heart of how our officers need to be able to do their job in an environment when they are accused of many, many things.
Okay, thank you, Representative McKean. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I rise to speak on this bill with Representative McKean, and we were working on these amendments together. First, I just want to acknowledge my privilege here as a white man. I know I probably will never be the victim of police misconduct, but that does not mean that police misconduct doesn't happen. However, I also work in law enforcement, And I work with a lot of these very well-respected, honorable law enforcement officers of all races and of all genders, and know that probably 95, 99% of them do their job ethically, morally, and with dignity, and want to do right by their community. My hesitation with this bill is it brings us from a period where there's almost no transparency to automatic transparency. I think there can be a middle ground. Those are the amendments I was trying to work on with Representative McKean, that we cannot get onto this bill because of procedural rules. So all I will do right now is ask, if this bill does advance out of the House, that they work on it in the Senate. I understand Senator Foote is taking the mantle if this gets over. There is a middle ground. The bill, as we are debating now, is not that middle ground. But I hope that if it does advance, there is a goal that we all share of accountability, but we need to find a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. Representative Sandridge, and then Representative Harrod. I'd have you after him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as somebody who actually was an inner city police officer in a high crime area that had dealt with internal affairs, I'd like to just kind of tell a little bit of the truth of reality of internal affairs. First thing, yes, there are bad police officers. Just like any profession, there are bad people. And I feel that if someone does something bad, it needs to be showcased in society. It needs to be revealed. Our tax money is paying for this service, and if they do something out of the scope of their job, we need to find out about it. So there is room for improvement. Obviously, if an officer gets sued civilly, loses, and we have to pay tax money for the settlement, I want to know where my tax money went. So there is room for improvement. But what I want to discuss is the other 95% of this bill. I'm utterly shocked that during testimony and today, that the word allegation was not even spoke by the prime sponsor of this bill. Or alleged misconduct, alleged behavior. Is that where we have come, where we will not use the word alleged when we discuss an accusation towards a police officer? And anywhere in society, we'll use the word alleged until they are
Representative
proven
Sandridge,
guilty.
you're walking a fine line. We don't want to impugn the motives of any of our colleagues. So.
Okay, I'll move away from that.
Thank you, sir.
So, and I'm glad you did correct me because I was impugning. No, I was. There wasn't alleging. So thank you. So listen, we all want accurate information to be revealed to society. My view is, as a police officer, 95% of the information was wrong, were lies. Just like during committee it was said, 90% was found unsubstantiated. 90% of the within the research said it was unsubstantiated. Why is a clear majority of the information in internal affairs, the accusation, not true? Why is that? Well, let's look at it with some common sense. People don't like getting arrested. And I'll use my own personal examples. I worked in a high cocaine crack area. Crack dealers don't like being arrested. We disrupt their money. So what is common is for them to say, well, the officer planted it on me, hoping they will get an easier sentence upon conviction. It's kind of interesting that, I started during the advent of really cameras in police facilities. You know how many times an arrest came in and said the police officer stole my money? I had $1,000 of cash in my pocket. He stole it. Well, then we say, well, there's cameras there. Oh, then the suspect kind of says, okay, maybe he didn't steal it. How many times do you think an officer has been, and this personally happened to me, used the paddy wagon, transported a suspect to jail or for booking, and they said we stopped halfway to the jail and beat on them. Happens a lot. Until the suspect knows there's cameras in the paddy wagon, then they back off. See, the moral of the story is people don't like getting arrested. And part of the defense when you're arrested, and many times, is making accusations towards the police. Hopefully, you'll get a lighter sentence. That's why 90% or more of the accusations against police are inaccurate. But let's discuss why we're really not discussing that. Why don't we care about, in this bill, having accurate information come out? I think you'd get a lot more support if you say the information that's found to be accurate will release. But they don't want that in this bill. They want the other 90, 95% of lies. Why? Why when you say society needs accurate information on bad police? I think you get a lot of support on that. But you want the other 90% of false accusations to be thrown in there as well. Why is that? Why will you not say, so don't come off and say, this is to promote fair information about police. No, what it mostly is saying, I want to promote 90, 95% of false accusations towards police officers. Now, where you should be concerned, and this is kind of the same thing we discussed on the real estate bill. Police officers are commodities. And the more you beat up on the profession, you're going to have less people applying. I have difficulty finding an officer right now, and believe me, I know officers all across the country that'll say, you know what, I want my daughter to be a police officer. I want my friend to be a police officer. I want my son to be a police officer. I can't find a one that will say, I love the way this profession is going. I want my friends and relatives to be police officers. So get used to internal affairs investigations because we're going to have to hire less qualified officers. Less qualified officers means more society in danger. It means more internal affairs. So with that said, hopefully you will not support this bill. Thank you.
Representative Harrod. And Representative Beckman, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, or of the body, well, yeah, the committee. I've heard a lot of discussion about what Denver does and doesn't do when it comes to internal investigations. And we heard extensively in committee that what we see reflected in the strike below version, the version that's brought to you today, is exactly what Denver does. And so if we all agreed in committee and we all agree here that the Denver process is what we're trying to strive to, then this bill does that. This bill does that. And so I'm not sure why there's such conflict about whether or not the bill reflects the current process of Denver. It absolutely does. As a member of the Denver delegation, I have spoken with our representatives from the police department, the people who actually decide on these files and these cases, and they have said that the bill sponsors have worked with them diligently to create a process that is exactly in line with what Denver does. And so I don't understand why we're still having this debate about what the Denver process is. The Denver process is clearly described in your bill folder, and that's just the facts. That's just fact. So the other thing that we've heard about is, that this is going to be bad for, that transparency is going to be bad for the officers. There's too many cases that get out that maybe are unfounded, and this could be problematic. Well, in committee, we heard from members of the press. Members of the press said that once they get that entire file, more times than not, it actually means that they don't write a story because they have the information. There's no story there, and they just don't write about it. It's in the cases where there's no transparency, or yes, there is something egregious that was done by the law enforcement officer that then gets reflected in the media. But members, I don't understand when we have people who are literally dying and people who have the ability to take someone's freedom away, why we wouldn't want them to act with the utmost integrity and, yes, transparency. Now, we've all agreed here today that, yes, there are some bad law enforcement officers. We know that the majority of law enforcement officers are not. But we also know that for those that are, we have to do something about it. And hiding the files is not the answer. Families, communities deserve to see this information, deserve to have this information when requested and when appropriate. The proper safeguards are there. Now, let me tell you, Denver has gone through a lot of struggle to get here. It was not easy. It was not just this, oh yeah, this is how we're going to do these files because we think it's the right thing to do. They have gone through court cases after court cases after court cases. Denver, in fact, has one of the highest payouts for improper use of force, excessive use of force, by law enforcement. But the transparency, members, helps this process. It is a rigorous process that we have here right now in Denver. It should not be so hodgepodge that we cannot get information when we need to. The public needs this information. And quite frankly, the majority of times, it does lean in the officer's favor, and we need to see that information when requested. So as much as people want to blow up this bill, it's actually quite, I think, a modest approach to this issue. And with respect to the bill sponsor, because of all the stakeholding that it had to do, I understand why we had to get here. But quite frankly, it's quite modest. So I'm not understanding where the conflict is coming. In fact, there are 14 states that have this exact same process. 14 states, members. So with all due respect to the bill sponsors, to the folks who would like to offer amendments that reflect what Denver does, there's no amendment that we need to offer to reflect what Denver does because Denver's model is reflected in the bill before us. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative Harrod. Representative Beckman, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't in committee, so I have a question for the sponsor. I'm wondering why in this bill that police officers are singled out for the internal affairs investigations transparency. I'm wondering if this isn't just the next step will be all taxpayer-funded positions, because there are a lot of complaints against specific identified incidents of alleged misconduct involving a member of the public with human service caseworkers, correctional officers, district attorneys, parole employees, firefighters, teachers. There are a lot of people that impact very significantly the lives of individuals, and I'm just wondering why that the police officers were singled out, or if this is just the first step to make transparency on all internal investigations, all human resource documents open to the public for people that are paid by the tax dollar.
I have next in the queue Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is a very interesting bill. If you recall that last year, I was actually a co-prime sponsor with Representative Coleman on a very similar bill. And so, you know, with respect to this issue, I find it very important that we put policies in place that do provide more transparency, more sunshine, so to speak, or sunlight on how the police essentially conduct their own affairs or govern themselves. I think in principle, this is actually a very good idea. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with an entity, and this was brought up in a previous speech, why are we sort of focusing on law enforcement? I think a part of it is because law enforcement has the ability to take your freedoms away, especially in the line of duty. And that's a very, very weighty responsibility. And so, I'll quote, Governor Polis, who was quoting, from a comic book, with great power comes great responsibility. I truly believe that's what we're dealing with in this instance. I think when we're dealing with the public's right to know, that's something that we should take seriously. So this bill, as I've seen it, I think there's some, certainly some bullet points that I'd like to highlight as for the need and as to why we actually need to support these kind of measures. There's been fact sheets on it, but I'd like to read a little bit from it. This bill does provide transparency and accountability, and in doing so, it's going to actually build public trust, more public trust and public confidence in law enforcement. Investigators are more likely to do a better job knowing that their findings will be open to the public, especially given the fact that this bill only applies to completed, finished IA reports. The public has a compelling interest in knowing that their complaints about officer misconducts are handled fairly and thoroughly. And taxpayers should know how and why public dollars have been spent to settle cases of law enforcement misconduct. And that's a very important point that I want to highlight. There have been instances where law enforcement has settled with individuals, and we kind of don't know why in a lot of those instances. And I think if we're going to be having taxpayer dollars going out or being paid out in some sort of settlement, we should know what's going on. That's very reasonable. And I'll even say another issue that I've had with this topic is that what you see is a lot of law enforcement agencies have basically denied people without actually looking at it on a case-by-case basis. There's been this summary denial that we've seen in a lot of these instances. And I think that's unfortunate because that forces the party or the individual seeking that information to go to court to try and have a judge help them out. And that's not possible. You can't do that in every single instance. And I think what you're seeing in this bill, especially with the work that Representative Coleman has done, is you've seen a willingness to put guardrails in place, mechanisms in place, not only to ensure that the floodgates are going to be made open, but especially with respect to the redaction process that's laid out in this bill. I just simply disagree. I do not think that there is going to be sort of this problem that is going to arise because we're bringing a little bit more transparency, to this process. And I want to specifically, talk about something that happened in my neck of the woods in Colorado Springs. And this isn't a fact sheet, and I'm sure many of you received it, but this had to do with a case involving Alexis Aker, and this was in Colorado Springs, and I'll read it just from the fact sheet here. She was slammed to the floor face first while handcuffed. $100,000 settlement, and the IA file was denied. In May of 2016, the city of Colorado Springs paid Alexis Aker $100,000 to settle the lawsuit she filed after a police officer slammed her to the floor face first while she was handcuffed in a hospital waiting area. The impact broke a tooth and bloodied her face. Ms. Aker, 18 at the time, had been arrested for assault on an officer and taken to the hospital before being jailed. An internal investigation of that incident took more than a year and resulted in discipline against the officer, who later resigned. The city denied several requests for the Colorado Springs Independent for records on the investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are going to be paying out taxpayer money to settle these cases, then we have absolutely every right to see what's in those files. That's only reasonable, and I think it's absolutely acceptable for us to be writing policy that doesn't go too far. I would agree that this is a very modest proposal that does bring some transparency and helps I think, make our law enforcement processes stronger. So I would ask respectfully for a yes vote on this.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Representative Weissman, you're up next, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to speak to a number of different things that have come up in the debate so far. To the question posed by the representative from Arapahoe County, why are we singling out police? This is a bill about the Criminal Justice Records Act. It pertains to records related to law enforcement officials. We're talking about peace officers because that's what this bill is about. As to some of the other things alluded to, that would be not CJRA, but rather CORA, 2472 Part 2 rather than Part 3, and those records may be available in the right procedures with the right fact patterns under that law, but that's a different bill for another time. To the point of Garrity, that was a U.S. Supreme Court case in the late 1960s holding, and appropriately so, that given the 5th and 14th amendment right against self-incriminating statements in a criminal context where a peace officer is required to make a statement in an internal investigation context, that statement cannot then turn around and be used as evidence in a criminal proceeding, should there be one related to the same fact pattern that generated the IA. That's the law now. It doesn't need to be explicitly put in the bill because it's binding Supreme Court constitutional law. That said, L007 that we did adopt several minutes ago further clarifies that, and appropriately so. So I think to the extent that there is a Garrity concern here, we have more than adequately dealt with that. To the point about public interest and to the point about the idea that the law is working, I think it is the contention of the bill and the contention of the sponsors that the law is not working, and that happens to be my contention too. Existing statute does allow denial of access to records when it is deemed to be in the public interest. And the problem is that for many years that exception has been swallowing the entire rule. That's why we are on the second year debating a bill like this bill. One of the things that some of us who've heard this bill have received is this report from the University of Denver Law School, and they're not blue, they're not red, they're just trying to get to the bottom of things, as you do at a law school. And I will read a little bit from this. After requesting a list or log of internal affairs files from 43 law enforcement agencies across Colorado, 24 agencies provided no responsive records, 7 provided a log with such little detail as to be minimally transparent, 5 provided a list or log that was moderately transparent, and 5 were substantially transparent. So 5 out of 43, I don't think that's the law working. Goes on, after requesting 61 particular IA files from 17 agencies, nearly all were unwilling to release a complete file regardless of the situation or outcome. Of those 61, 7 agencies did not respond to requests. 7 agencies flatly denied the requests. 1 provided a duplicate report. 2 provided 4-figure cost prohibitive sums for releasing the files. That's just the work to compile the files, never mind, as you heard, the 5-figure litigation cost if you do have to go to court under the existing mechanism, and then again look out for the public interest exception. And as you've heard, 12 or 14 states have some kind of statutory framework like the bill proposes to enact here to require the release of law enforcement files. So I would submit that the law is in fact not working as it is set up right now. All of that said, after negotiating for quite a long time, the sponsor has made, I think, a number of concessions. In the strike below amendment that we heard in Judiciary and that we did just enact here, it provides the following. A custodian of law enforcement records shall redact all of the following. Any personal identifying information, any identifying or contact information related to confidential informants, witnesses, or victims, home address, phone, and email of a peace officer, any information prohibited for public release by state or federal law, any medical or health information, any information related to a juvenile, any non-final disciplinary recommendations. In addition to which, the custodian may also redact the following: compelled statements, that was the Garrity point a few minutes ago, video interviews, any video or photograph that raises substantial privacy concerns, the identity of officers who volunteered information related to the IA, and it goes on from there. So we are redacting a lot, and that is in response to the very valid privacy and public safety concerns that have been brought up here. Another key point that I think everybody ought to really look at is that the entire mechanism that we're setting forth here applies only to internal investigations initiated after the effective date. So anything that started previously, even if it's still ongoing, is not even within the reach of this. And That was a concession that the sponsor made in negotiations with law enforcement. So I think that there is not a balance in the law now. I think this legislation strikes to improve the balance, and it does so with a lot of carve-outs allowed for the safety of law enforcement. All of this said, I just want to end with where I'm coming from on this personally, which is as a resident of and a representative from Aurora, where I know my chief, where I know some of the top division commanders, where I believe that they are good people and good peace officers, and they are trying really hard to do the right thing. Our chief came in and became chief of the Aurora Police approximately a week after a lethal use of force incident. So he stepped into a very interesting situation. Our officers, and we have one of the largest police forces in the state, are gradually being trained in crisis intervention training, which I think is a good thing. There is a very high premium placed on community outreach by top command in APD. Again, I really think they're trying to do the right thing. All of that said, over years, there have been some really tough things happen in my community. There have been use of force incidents. There have been fatalities. There have been things that have shaken the trust of the community in law enforcement. And if we care about public safety, the community needs to be able to trust law enforcement, to go to them, to report things that aren't right, to promote public safety. And I think this bill is just about striking a little bit of a better balance than we have now for the sake of that trust that the community ought to be able to have in the folks who enforce our criminal law and start the wheels turning sometimes on our criminal justice process. So I commend the work that the sponsor has done, and I think we've slightly further improved the measure by the amendment that we heard here, and I encourage us to support this bill.
Thank you, Representative Weissman. Representative Benavides. And Representative Sanders, I have you next and listening after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. I just want to clarify a couple of things because I keep hearing people that may not understand. Internal affairs files are not personnel files. There are operating rules or regulations in law enforcement agencies that have to be followed. And complaints that a citizen brings against an officer is because they feel they have breached those requirements, and that's what's looked at. Most of the cases that you hear that are terrible cases, that maybe someone was shot by a police officer or a major critical incident, those, or anything, even if an officer pushed somebody and they ended up in the hospital as a result of that. If there's any allegation of a criminal violation, those are referred to the DA's office, and the DA determines if criminal charges should be brought against the officer. If none are brought, there is no law violation. It is brought back for the internal affairs investigation. This is not the personnel file. The personnel file would only receive any discipline that is brought against this officer, because just like any employee, if you're disciplined for a breach of the internal policy or rules, that'll be placed in your personnel file. So this is no different. This is not a personnel file. It is not a criminal investigation. It's merely an administrative review of the actions of an officer. So let's be clear of what we're talking about. Because my colleague just spoke about the Garrity advisement. The Garrity advisement is a compelled statement, and we just amended this bill to say that cannot be used. So I think we've addressed that. But then this other issue that I wanted to address, two issues. One is that we're singling out officers as compared to other government employees. We're not. Last year, we heard testimony from the then Deputy Director of the Secretary of State's office that talked about bringing a complaint of sexual harassment against someone, against a judge, actually, and it was unfounded. Nothing was found. Everything was completely done. She asked for a copy of the file, and they refused. We passed a law last year that allowed her to receive a copy of the file, or anyone else, because this goes to infractions not of criminal law, but of policies and procedures within the state government in this case. So we haven't singled out officers. We do this, it's our job. The issue of whether alleged versus sustained. Anytime anybody brings a complaint against an officer, it's alleged. That's why you have the investigation. That's why it's sent to Internal Affairs so they can investigate it. So it's alleged, and that's why that's there, because, as I mentioned earlier and others have mentioned, 9 out of 10 of those alleged violations are not sustained. Most of the reasons they're not sustained is not because we have video in a paddy wagon that exonerates the officer. It's more because it's a complaint between an officer and an individual. There is no preponderance of the evidence in that case because it's one word against the other. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of cases that were not sustained. They were allegations. The very first case I looked at in 1992 was about, and it wasn't even brought by the individual, it was brought by passengers on a bus. There was a guy on the bus, he was white. He was fighting with passengers. And he got into an actual fist fight with one passenger, so the bus driver said, okay, I'm stopping this bus, I'm calling the police. The other guy took off, but this guy sat down and stayed there. When the police came, everybody on the bus, including the driver, is telling him, this is the person who was fighting, and described him, and he was a young white man. What do the police do? They go to the black man on the bus, and they stand him up, they search him, and everybody's yelling at him, it wasn't him. So somebody on that bus brought that complaint. That complaint was not sustained. Those officers were said to have been working within policy. So that would have been a complaint that if we did just sustain, we couldn't have seen. We had many complaints about against a particular DUI officer. And can you imagine when a DUI officer has a drunk, basically, that what happens is it's their word against the other, and clearly one of them is drunk. But this DUI officer, compared to all the other DUI officers, and this one doesn't work there anymore, had several complaints about slamming a woman over a car and breaking her arm, about somebody apparently walking into a mirror and bloodying their face. None of those complaints were sustained because it was the drunk person against the officer. Those are the situations. In the sheriff's department, we had a complaint where a sheriff apparently looked at NCIC, which is the national information tool that officers can look at, and him and his wife had been at an event with another couple, and he thought the other woman was something strange about her. So he checked NCIC and found that the woman was a transsexual, had previously been a man. And so he told his wife. The next time they saw this couple at a party, the wife told the other husband, did you know your wife was a transsexual? And as a result, they were divorced as a result of that. That transsexual wife brought a complaint that this officer, the sheriff, had checked NCIC against policy. That complaint was unfounded because they said it was his wife who shared the information, not him. And we said, that's ridiculous. So as a result, that woman had to take that case to court, and Denver had to pay a settlement in that case. But that case was initially unfounded. He was never disciplined. Those are the kinds of cases that people cannot see. We're not talking about shootings or other things, because when there's a shooting, guess what? Attorneys are helping those individuals and those families. Those are the cases that are settled or they go to court. We're talking about the small investigations of rudeness, of an incident that doesn't make the paper. that those people have a right to see that investigation file without going to court, without paying $20,000 or $30,000. And that's the bulk of those cases. And they should be allowed to see them. And again, there are so many caveats in this bill with respect to redactions, with respect to protecting the officer and the other witnesses' rights as set out in case law, and because this bill is after everything has happened, after any criminal investigations, after any criminal filings, after any appeals, after everything is said and done. So members, this is a good bill. It protects all of those involved, and I would encourage you to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Benavides. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1119? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1119. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. House Bill 1119 is adopted. Assistant Majority Leader, Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1131 one day.
Will be laid over as requested. Mr. Randall, please read the title to Senate Bill 24.
Senate Bill 24 by Senator Tate, House Representatives Arndt and Hooten, concerning the payment of taxes by electronic funds transfers.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 24. There is no committee report.
To the bill.
This is a unanimous statutory revision committee, and it clarifies and codifies the existing departmental practice regarding the payment of sales tax and severance taxes via electronic funds transfer. And I urge a yes vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 24? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 24. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Thank you. Senate Bill 24 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title to Senate Bill 070.
Senate Bill 70 by Senator Tate, House Representative Arndt, concerning an update to statutory language authorizing the Department of Natural Resources to receive donations to be credited to the Colorado Natural Resources Foundation Fund.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 70. There is no committee report.
To the bill.
Thank you. Senate Bill 70, again, was an SRC bill, and it just clarifies the Department of Natural Resources, in addition, is authorized currently to receive or reject gifts or money, property, to hold these funds or property in trust, invest, sell, or exchange, blah, blah, blah. This bill clarifies that the authority to receive these gifts also includes grants and donations, one, and there was an amendment in the Senate that also changes the name from foundation to Gifts, Grants, and Donations Fund. I urge a yes vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 70? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 70. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Senate Bill 70 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 80.
Senate Bill 80 by Senator Zenzinger, House Representative Arndt, concerning eliminating the authority of the State Board of Health to adopt rules establishing standards to ensure that certain entities are prepared for an emergency epidemic.
We welcome back Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is another SRC bill, and it repeals an obsolete statutory provision.
Representative Arndt, would you move the bill first, please?
I'm sorry. I moved Senate Bill 80. Got too excited. I moved Senate Bill 80. There is no committee report.
Thank you. To the bill.
Thank you. So the bill repeals an obsolete statutory provision requiring the State Board of Health to adopt rules and establish standards requiring area trauma advisory councils and managed care organizations to prepare for an emergency epidemic. And I urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 80? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 80. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. Thank you. Senate Bill 80 is adopted.
Rep. Arndt, don't go away. We do.
It's you. You carry the weight, man.
Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 82.
Senate Bill 82 by Senator Moreno, also Representative McKean, concerning clarification the State Board of Health has no authority over money allocated to the Department of Public Health and Environment.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 82. There is no committee report.
To the bill.
This is another SRC bill. That's why I asked Rep. Martin not to go anywhere. And this one actually is just clarifying that State Board of Health does not act as a custodian for any departmental money for CDPHE. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 82? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 82. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Thank you. Senate Bill 82 is adopted.
Unvigorous, no.
Mr. Randall, please read the title to Senate Bill 83.
Senate Bill 83 by Senators Engineer House Representative McKean concerning the repeal of obsolete provisions regarding air quality control in connection therewith, eliminating the requirement of the State Board of Health to supervise certain air quality control programs, removing statutory provisions relating to the Air Pollution Variance Board and the Air Quality Hearings Board.
Well done, Mr. Randall. Representative McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 83 and ask for an aye vote. And a short round of applause for Mr. Randall. That was remarkable. Good job.
Thank you. To the bill, Representative McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this another statutory revision bill, and literally this is just making sure that air quality control programs are placed where they need to be in statute under CDPHE. I urge an aye vote.
Any further discussion on Senate Bill 83? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 83. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Senate Bill 83 is adopted. Assistant Majority Leader Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
You have heard the motion. Seeing no objection, the committee will rise up and report. Thank you.
The House will come back to order. Mr. Randall, please read the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Madam Speaker, your committee of the whole big report is under its consideration the following tax bills being the second of their following recommendations thereon. House Bill 1119 is amended House 1170 is amended House Bill 1172 is amended passed second gross place count of 30 and final passage. Senate Bill 24, Senate Bill 70, Senate Bill 80, Senate Bill 82, Senate Bill 83 passed second rise place count for 30 and final passage. House Bill 1037, House Bill 1130, House Bill 1131 laid over until February 26, 2019, retaining their place on the calendar.
Representative Exum. You have heard the motion. There is an amendment at the desk. Mr. Randall, please read the same amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Sane moved to amend the report of the committee to hold to reverse the action taken by the committee in not adopting the following Sane Amendment L00-8 to House Bill 1170 to show that said amendment passed, that House Bill 1170 as amended passed.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the same amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, colleagues, this is this important. I need to bring up this amendment again since it didn't pass on voice vote, supposedly. But the problem, we need to have some kind of standard for mold. We've heard from Representative Beckman earlier that there is currently no standard. This protects both the landlord and the tenant. This is very important because, again, if landlords feel that there is no standard in place, especially in areas with high mold, older homes with high mold, they may not offer those homes for rent, or they'll raise the rents to account for anybody withholding rent on account of they think there may be a mold that's dangerous to the point of being uninhabitable. So there needs to be some kind of authority in this matter. A home inspector, people use home inspectors every day. So I think there should be some kind of standard. And I think this will help the bill do what it's intended to do. So I urge an aye vote.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will support this amendment. Last year, NPR did an article about these kind of vague requirements that have nothing in law to guide them, and talked extensively about how they would cause rent strikes. I don't think we want to follow what California and New York is doing. I think this will be very detrimental to the cost of apartments and housing in Colorado, and having mold that is defined nowhere in any of our statutes or public health is going to lead us to increased housing cost, and it is really unfair for the owner of the property, and does take away private property rights. I ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I need to ask for a no vote on the amendment. The language in the bill, we're not talking about all mold. Yes, mold is a biological reality. It is all around us, and for most of us, most of the time, it's not a problem. We wouldn't have cheese without mold. We wouldn't have a lot without mold. But for some people, it is a problem. And in some apartments, it is a problem, and it can be a life-threatening problem, and that is the point of the bill. So the key language is that there is mold associated with dampness, which condition, if not remedied, would materially interfere with the health or safety of the tenant. That is language that a court knows how to interpret. I will just say procedurally, we have had a lot of interesting discussions about mold. We heard from a very thoughtful executive from an environmental remediation company and committee, and we've traded contact information with him. I have heard from folks who have gone through these remediation experiences themselves, who've been put out of their houses, that they own, by the way, not even that they rent, to the tune of $100,000. These are highly educated, intelligent people who've offered some thoughtful commentary, and we are committed to continuing to work on this should this bill pass to the other chamber, and I hope it does. And I would invite any members who want to be part of getting the mold provisions right to simply speak to the sponsors. You know where to find us. We are here all day. Procedurally, this is not the right way to address something that is this important in the bill by amendment on second reading that we've had no chance to review and talk to our stakeholders with. So I ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Minority Leader Neville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the point here is that we are declaring a residence uninhabitable without a single standard. As we heard, mold is a biological fact. It exists. What is it? Is it just the little bit in the shower that didn't get cleaned? What actually makes it a significant health risk? The bill doesn't define this at all. This amendment attempts to define this and actually makes it a clean and clear standard. I urge a yes vote on the amendment.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the same amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 22 aye votes, 40 no votes to excuse, and 1 vacant, the sane amendment fails. Which brings us back to the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report. If there's no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 45 aye votes, 17 no votes, 2 excused, and 1 vacant, the report of the Committee of the Whole is passed. Announcements and introductions. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a couple of announcements. The first one, which won't come as a surprise to many of you, but I'm co-chairing the Behavioral Health Caucus because we're trying to figure out why I behave the way I do. You have that on your desk Wednesday from 12 to 1, 3:54. Lunch will be provided for legislators. And my second announcement also has to do with food, fellowship, and also the Bible study tomorrow morning. Downstairs in 109, there's food, fellowship, and we are studying in the book of 1 John. So please come down and join us tomorrow morning as well as Wednesday at noon. Thank you.
Representative Herod. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members of the Finance Committee, we will be meeting today at 1:30 in LSBA. We'll be hearing Senate Bill 29, Land Graph. We'll be hearing House Bill 19, 1138, Williams and Melton. We'll also be hearing 1164, Singer. Be on time.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, our friends at Bicycle Colorado will be having breakfast tomorrow for Safe Streets Day here at the Capitol. They'll be having some citizens to come down and talk about transportation in general, but also how bicycles fit into that picture from 8 to 10 tomorrow in the West Foyer. Please join us.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members of Energy and Environment, we will be hearing House Bill 1143 from Representative Lontine and 1159, Representatives Gray and Jaquez Lewis at 1:30, room 112.
Representative Esgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And many of you may not have heard, but tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock downstairs, Colorado Wins, the state employees state union will be here for breakfast. Come on down 8 o'clock tomorrow at 107. But also for those of you who are interested, I realize this is something I could have been announcing, but I'm going to start doing it now. At 1:30, the Joint Budget Committee is going to be meeting. We're actually going over figure setting, and I know we've tried to make this a more transparent opportunity for you all. I just want to let you know that we are going over the Office of the Governor today, so you're more than welcome to come in and listen and ask questions if you'd like.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rural Affairs and Agriculture Committee, we're meeting at 1:30 in room 107. We have one bill, Senate Bill 19 from Representative Gray about fireworks. It will be explosive. Come join us.
Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I just want to introduce to you Haley Grace Van Winkle.
Oh.
Wave, say hi. Thank you, members.
So cute. I have one announcement. Representative Catlin will substitute for Representative Wilson on education tomorrow only. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until later today.
Seeing no objection, the House will be in recess till later today.